Before we get to RE6, it's time to take a little detour. And we got to talk about this game right here. Resident Evil Revelations. Basically taking place before RE5, yet released after it, and originally for the 3DS. This game is what changed Resident Evil. Starting to, anyways, for the better. So make sure you guys stick around and let's talk about Resident Evil Revelations and basically how this game started us on the corrective path to what Resident Evil is now. Hit thumbs up, subscribe if you guys are new, and welcome to Resident Evil Retrospective.
Resident Evil Retrospective.
So originally for me, I didn't play Resident Evil Revelations on the 3DS. At the time, I didn't have a 3DS, and it was kind of weird to me to play a Resident Evil game on handheld. Yeah, we've had Resident Evil handhelds before, and while some of them were good, others were, let's just say, not the best. This one had rave reviews for being a Resident Evil game on a handheld. Plus, the mechanics that are in this game plays to the 3DS pretty well. But being unfortunately the situation where I didn't have a 3DS at the time, and I never got around to buying the game on 3DS, even when I did get a 3DS, my first iteration of this game was actually on the PS3. The PS3 version was a little clunky. It felt weird to play, to be honest with you, and that had a lot to do with the fact that the game was initially intended for handheld consoles. But with the release of the PS4 and Xbox One versions of the game, which was the HD versions of that game, it felt better. It felt easier to play and more at home. And the reason why is because they bumped up the resolution as well as the frame rates. The game now plays at 60 FPS, where on PS3 it played at 30 FPS, so it felt slower. Playing through Resident Evil Revelations, honestly, for me it's a mixed bag. I did and still do enjoy the game, but there are parts of the game where I feel like is kind of unnecessary and unneeded. And honestly, I don't understand the reasoning behind it. A lot of the game feels like it's two, maybe three games all into one, and it's very, very weird. Now, weird can be good and weird can be bad, but in this case, weird is just weird. Now, when this game was announced, we had a lot of different marketing for this game, and part of the marketing centered around Chris Redfield betraying Jill. And honestly, that version got scrapped, and I kind of would have wanted to see a version of this game with that storyline plot in it. But unfortunately, it wasn't that, and we got something different. And what we got here is I'm sorry, but your princess is another castle kind of situation, as this game takes place on a ship, and apparently there's 3 different ships. So the first ship we find ourselves with Jill and a new character named Parker as she investigates a ship looking for Chris. While at the same time, Chris is on another ship with somebody named Jessica investigating rumors of something going on with the BSAA and bioterrorism and all that stuff. Yeah, we're there. And spoilers, this all culminates into there being a third ship. Yeah, it's confusing. Honestly, this plot is not the greatest thing. But what does shine in this game is the horror elements. This game brings back the horror that was missing in Resident Evil for a good while. While RE4 did have horror elements, it was more action horror than it was survival horror. This game brings back the survival horror aspects while mixing in some action on top of everything. And honestly, I'm not really feeling the action parts of it, which I'll explain in just a moment. So instead of zombies, we get these weird goopy-like creatures that kind of resemble like the creatures that we would see in RE0. And when I say those creatures, those blobby creatures that look like they belong in R.L. Stein's Goosebumps or something. But this game, there's an outbreak of a T virus that is called the T Abyss virus, and that's what's created these kind of weird creatures. While at the same time, it does transform the people into these creatures instead of the creatures just showing up. And throughout this game, we get some flashbacks to different moments in a point of time where apparently there was a city called Terra Grigia. Like, they couldn't think of an easier name for that, but we're here. At Terra Grigia, and there was an outbreak of the T virus in Terra Grigia that resulted in the city being destroyed. And honestly, I thought these moments were really, really cool to see, and I probably would have preferred a game to be just centered around this city because of what was in it. Like, there were cutscenes of hunters roaming the streets of the city, and the part that you play as Parker in this moment fighting all these hunters, like, this was a missed opportunity to just have a game based around the city and having those moments be the final moments of the game. Honestly, like, this game, when you paint the picture of it, it just sounds like a mess. And that's just the first part of it. I mean, that's not the first part, or one part of it, I should say. The other parts of it revolve around us taking control of different characters. So not only are we taking control of Jill, but we're also taking control of Chris and Jessica, and we're also taking control of two new characters called Quint and Keith, who I don't like at all, which could be completely cut from this game, and I would be okay with that. And the reason why is because their segments revolve around action, and every time we interact with these characters, for some reason they're playing some weird hip-hop music to introduce these characters. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. These characters are very annoying, not to the levels of Steve, but they're just annoying. And honestly, again, they could have been cut from this game. Now, I know it might seem like I'm complaining a lot about this game, but think about it this way. I wanted to get rid of the bad stuff first, kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid, because you know what's going to happen. You know I'm going to talk about the bad stuff. Might as well get it over with. Talk about the bad stuff so we can talk about the good stuff. So I'm done. We're done. We talked about the bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff, because there's so much good stuff in Resident Evil Revelations. So much of it, honestly, is positive that I wish we had more games like this. Let's talk about that. First things first, it's the return of Jill. Jill that we actually get to, like, play as the main character. And God, if you're not familiar with my channel and you're not familiar with, you know, the games that I like, well, Jill is one of my favorite characters in video gaming. Not sponsored. I know you just heard a soda can opening. Or saw it open, but, you know, excuse me. Refreshing. Not sponsored. Jill is one of my favorite characters in all of gaming, not just in Resident Evil. All of gaming. And the reason why is I honestly don't know. Like, it's not like she has a huge emotional, story that she goes through and all of this stuff. And honestly, most of her story you're gonna miss if you're not paying attention. See, Jill's backstory is mostly told through other media. Like, how many of you playing Resident Evil these days? I'm saying these days. I'm not talking about like old school Resident Evil fans, but how many of you playing Resident Evil these days know that Jill is of French and Japanese descent? How many of you know that she is a daughter of a renowned thief? And that's why she's the master of unlocking. Not many of you, I can probably assume. And again, I'm not talking about old school Resident Evil fans, because us old school Resident Evil fans, we know this. How many of you guys who are newer Resident Evil fans know that Chris is a renowned pilot and marksman? You probably don't. And that's because these games don't really go through the backstory of these characters. And that's okay. That's fine. I mean, that's not what these games are really about. But for some weird reasons, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm a fan of the Terminator. Maybe it's because I'm a fan of Alien. And I love seeing a strong female protagonist like Jill. Maybe that's what it is. But I love Jill as a main character. She's my favorite Resident Evil character. She is one of my favorite top gaming characters, period. And it's a shame we don't get much of her these days, because for some reason Capcom just loves riding on Chris Redfield's dick. But this game, you play mostly as Jill. And I say mostly because, again, we do play as Chris Redfield, and we do play as these other two characters that you could just write off. There is also a segment where we play as Parker, which I actually really like that segment, and I wish we had more of Parker because I thought he was a very, very good character. He plays kind of like almost like a Barry, but younger, and I really, really like that. So with these characters, there's a lot of twists and turns here and there, similar to any other Resident Evil game that you played. Like, you know, Wesker betraying the STARS members or Ada becoming a double, triple agent. Anyways, you know, there's always going to be those characters in these games. And that's what it is. This game is basically the revelations of the trouble within the BSAA, which after this game, the BSAA became more solid, more steady to what it was in RE5. Now with, you know, RE Village leaving that cliffhanger. But we're not going to go there. This isn't about Resident Evil Village. We'll talk about that when we get to that moment. Revelations does horror well. The moments that you get that are very, not terrifying, but that are horrific moments, or that just scream that, like, in a way that makes you want more of it, it does it so exceedingly well. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the ship is laid out, or ships, I should say, because again, plural, there's 3 ships. The first 2 you get to explore, and it makes you feel like you're exploring the same ship until it comes to the revelation that it's 2 different ships. And it plays it in a way because the ships are laid out identical. They just have different names, and because they have different names, they're in different locations. So that's why you have the split of Jill looking for Chris, and Chris responding to Jill's distress call. I'm not really clear on that, but Chris goes with Jessica investigating rumors of, you know, things, and they think they're investigating the same ship, but it turns out to be a different ship that Jill is on. The enemies in this game, I wouldn't say they vary tremendously, but they play on the ocean aspect of things. You can see a lot of fish-like qualities in some of these enemies, and I mean, it makes sense because they're out in the middle of the ocean and the virus is called T-Abyss. How creative. I mean, I guess at this point they're running out of viruses and stuff, but Revelations also kind of marks the last time that we see a virus until Resident Evil 6, which I think Resident Evil 6, you know what, we're not going to go there either. It's so easy to get sidetracked in these videos because I mention other games and just kind of reminds me, like, do we want more viruses and stuff? I mean, after the C virus in RE6, I kind of do. Viruses aside, exploring the different ships, honestly, in Resident Evil Revelations is so much fun. The ship itself has moments that make you feel like you're back in the Spencer Mansion. Hell, they even brought back item boxes in this game. Why? I don't know. But they did. It's there. I mean, they're not that useful, but they're there. And exploration is key to this game. It plays like the old games. It plays like Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, where you can explore this mansion of a ship in a Castlevania-style way. And this is something I've always said. The original trilogy and Code Veronica, well, and also Resident Evil 0, not so much Resident Evil 0, but it has some of elements in there. Those games are Metroidvania-style games. Yeah, they're survival horror, but they are Metroidvania-style games at their core. Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5, 6 are not. And that's the thing with these games. Part of the charm back then with the original games was having that exploration, because it made it creepier to have to explore versus being on an on-rails linear style game where everything is going to be the same on every playthrough. Like RE4, for example, isn't as good of a game as it is. The problem is that there's no exploration in RE4. Yeah, okay, there's little things here and there you can deviate slightly from, but overall, there's no exploration. And because there's no exploration in RE4, there's no way to challenge the player outside of just increasing difficulty. Think back to Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3, the charm about Resident Evil 3, and the reason why I love that game so much is because you can explore the whole city in this Metroidvania style way. You find a key, you unlock this new area. You find these key items to unlock the gates to be able to get to the tram or trolley. It was a trolley in RE3. I'm thinking of RE3 Remake where it's a subway. I'm like mixing them up. Anyways, you got to explore it in that Metroidvania style. And on top of that, because of the way that it was, having to explore it that way, enemies could hide in different places because you had to backtrack. So if you backtrack to an area where you thought it was clear, now there's enemies again. In a linear style game, you can't do that. Once you play through a game, like RE4, for example, you know where everything is. You know where the enemies are going to appear. Yeah, it did have adaptive difficulty, and the better that you played, the harder, quote unquote, it became. But that doesn't really affect it too much when you really think about it. Because in RE3, the original version, you had a randomized playthrough. You can have one of 4 different variations of that game, and the puzzles would be different, and the enemy locations would be different, and the item locations would be different. And that made it even better. That's the only game that did that. It's unfortunate. I wish more games did that, but that's the only one that did that. Revelations, on the other hand, allows you to explore things, and it rewards you for backtracking. There's items in the game that you'll get later on that allow you to unlock boxes and safe boxes, and that reward you with more ammo, more ways to survive this whole situation. And that's one of the things that I really love about Revelations. Compared to RE4, RE5, and god-awful RE6, Revelations played it safe by mixing both the survival horror aspects of it and the action horror aspects of it. And much like the older Resident Evil games, the action ramps up, but it ramps up in a way that plays phenomenally well. Because one of the things you got to keep in mind is when it came to the original games being survival horror, by the second half of the game, you're a powerhouse. You're a powerhouse because you have all these weapons, all this ammo, and you're not afraid anymore. And you're just ready to just take on whatever gets in your way. That's why when you get into RE1, by the time you're in the Umbrella Lab, you're overpowered. Assuming that you made your way through and you were able to collect enough ammo and stuff, you're overpowered. RE2, same thing. By the time you reach Nest, you're overpowered. RE3, by the time you reach the Dead Factory, again, you're overpowered for the area. The enemies don't scare you anymore because you've gotten to the point where you as a player and your character have just become powerful. And Revelations does exactly that. It's not like RE4 or RE5 where you're pretty much powerful from the beginning. Granted, yeah, you start with a handgun, but because of the nature of the game being focused on action, you're powerful at all times. There's never really a moment where you're like, oh, I ran out of ammo. Because in those games, you don't run out of ammo. Enemies drop items, they drop ammo. Revelations doesn't do this. Revelations makes it feel like old school survival horror. You can run out of ammo. And if you run out of ammo, you're kind of screwed. That's why I like Revelations as much as I do. That's why I think it's a phenomenal game. Revelations also features probably one of the best final bosses in any Resident Evil game. It's the most annoying boss fight, but at the same time, it's one of the best ones. It's difficult. It takes your overconfidence and shreds it completely. You get to the point at the end of the game where you feel like you're this unstoppable monster. And then you truly fight an unstoppable monster that can teleport, that can phase in and out, that can create doppelgangers of itself. This is my favorite Resident Evil boss fight. And again, it is the most annoying. And it plays, again, a callback to the original game where we fought a tyrant. And in this game, you're fighting a tyrant. It's not like RE4 where you're fighting some weird spider-looking creature, or RE5 where, you know, it's Wesker, but a bad version of Wesker. Revelations gives us what we would have wanted the tyrant to be in the original Resident Evil game. And my God, it is terrifying and it is difficult and I love it. Again, this is one of my favorite boss fights in any, or my favorite boss fight in any Resident Evil game. So far, there hasn't been a better one. There's a lot of things that I really like about this game. And while there are some things that I don't, and we talked about that at the beginning of this video, most of this is positive. This game just gives me what I wanted out of a Resident Evil game, while still being able to appeal to newer fans who came into the series at RE4 and RE5. I guess one of the other complaints that I would have and honestly, it's not that big a deal, but it is a complaint, is the episodic format that this game has. I don't understand why it's there. This game released on 3DS. It didn't release with episodes that you download. So it doesn't make any sense why it would release as an episodic format in the cartridge of the game, or as, you know, the disc in the PS3, 4, and Xbox versions. Same thing like with the chapters in RE4. I never understood why they decided to do that. That was just kind of odd. But again, this game is phenomenal. And I'm sure many of you who have played this game agree with me on that. There's so much to like about it. And I know that most retrospectives go into technical details and talk about history of these games and stuff. For me, it's more of a personal retrospective. It's more of a subjective look instead of an objective look at the game. Because I could do objective all day and every day, and while there might be some objective point of views in this, such as the negatives, most of this review is subjective and how it makes me feel when I play it. And at the end of the day, honestly, I think that's more important. How we feel when we play these games. Resident Evil Revelations, to me, started the trend of bringing back the survival horror, which eventually got cemented when Resident Evil 7 released. Which, by the way, I did do a full Resident Evil 7 video. You should go watch that. And that's more of an objective look at it. But I'll link that at the end of this one for you. I hope one day we get a revival of Revelations. Rumors have been around for a while that we're going to get a Revelations 3. I hope that happens. Revelations 1, Revelations 2, I love them both. We'll get to Revelations 2, which, spoiler, I like Revelations 2 even more. There's less to not like about Revelations 2 in my opinion. But we'll get there. I wish that Jill would make a comeback. I know that we've had Resident Evil I know that we've had Resident Evil 3 remake, and that did Jill dirty, to be honest. And I know that as of this video, there is a new Resident Evil movie that's releasing, and Jill's going to be in it. But I need a new game with Jill. I feel like there's so many missed opportunities that they haven't explored yet with Jill. And I really, really would like that to come to fruition in a future game. Anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate you. And I'll see you guys next time in my next Resident Evil retrospective. Refreshing. Not sponsored. You want to sponsor me, Mountain Dew? Not sponsored.